morning, everyone. You could do better than that. Good morning. There you go.
Let's play.
Exactly. Hello, if you haven't met me yesterday, my name is Mary. My pronouns are they, them. My current favorite game is probably Betrayal at House on the Hill. My fiance, I taught them how to play it, and they really love it, so we've been playing it a lot now. I said this spiel yesterday, but for anybody new, currently work at Marikey, which is a social services organization. Basically, I just do a lot of therapy and work with a lot of kids. I'm a family-based therapist. I have a master's in social work, bachelor's in theater, and I'm currently working on a postgraduate certificate in expressive arts therapies, as well as taking the Bodhana group's trainings for therapeutic tabletop and role-playing games. Today, we will be discussing challenging behaviors when playing board games and role-playing games. Raise your hand if you have ever played a board game or a role-playing game. You're ready. Board game or role-playing game where someone has exhibited a challenging behavior.
Oh, yeah.
That is everyone. So this is very applicable because people are people. Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you feel like you were the one that had the challenging behavior. Okay. All right. And one more time. Raise your hand if you felt like you knew what to do. Sort of. Raise your hand if you were like, I have absolutely no idea, this is terrible, and I want to quit. Okay. So in the middle. Bear with me as it's different, and I have to look up here to know what I'm doing now. Yeah, I'll blame you. So learning goals, I'm going to have, if you can't hear me, just let me know, because I'm speaking this way. Learning goals, you'll be able to label 3 challenging behaviors encountered while game playing. Label 1 to do strategies per challenging behavior to change or stop that challenging behavior. You'll be able to demonstrate 3 personal coping techniques for self-regulation when playing with challenging game players. If you're not a clinician, that just basically means if you get upset, take a couple deep breaths. Participants will be able to demonstrate 3 personal coping techniques for when they are the challenging game player. So if you realize that you're doing something that maybe is kind of rude, trying to figure out how to not be so rude. So everybody raised their hand when they said that they had had this experience of a challenging game player. Would anybody like to share one of their experiences of a challenging game player experience?
So in a home game of 5e, we had a character or a player who they basically wrote into their backstory or into their character that they were another player character's like former teacher, and then like basically put themselves in a position of power over top of that character and like put in a bunch of other stuff that was totally non-consent, and then whipped this out in the middle of a play session and didn't even tell the other player. The other player kind of rolled with it at the time, but then we turned around and like after the fact was like, that was not cool. What is going on here? And then like we all had like a thing later on about it.
Wow.
Like, you know, and debrief after the session.
Okay.
And you know, and it basically figured it out that way. And it was taken care of after that. But, yeah.
So it sounds like you were able to resolve the situation.
Oh, sure.
That's good.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any examples?
Yeah, tabletop game. There was I don't remember if it was the first time I had played it or not. I was playing with several other players that had, I believe, just about all of them had played the game. And it was at the very beginning of the game, and we were determining position on the board. And the rules stated that, you know, the players would go around in turn order, take their turn, place their pieces, and that was it. I think you know what I'm talking about. Maybe you know what I'm talking about. After that, you go in reverse order, with the person who placed last first places first. Places his or her piece, and then chooses 2 spaces on the board for resources. Okay. Now, I was not the last person to go. The person who was going last was under the belief, maybe this is how they interpreted the rules, that they could choose which 2 spaces they had placed on. The first 2 or the second 2. Because you placed your pieces on 2 spaces the first round, and then you placed 2 more pieces on the second round there. They said they could choose either one. I said, no, you can't. Not according to the rules. And they were saying, well, it really doesn't matter. And I thought, yes, it does. So we had a little bit of a discussion on it, and I'll use that as a polite word. And I eventually just decided to let it go. Because I knew what the rules said, and if you're not gonna play by the rules, then specify at the beginning of the game. Because the other players need to know this. And I tried to reason with them and say, hey, look, if you read what the rules say, you complete this, and then you complete this. You don't get a choice. None of the other players get a choice. Why should you? And I presented in a logical way. I might have raised my voice a little bit, so I could have been the problem child too. But I thought, no, wait a minute, this isn't right. But I let it go, and we just continued on and played the game.
So you feel like you were able to resolve it just by removing yourself from the problem, the situation?
Removing myself, I wouldn't say removing myself, but that is part of it. But realizing that, okay, this is not going to go the way I think it should go, which seemed the right way. So fine, I'll just let it go. I know what the rules say. I know how I play without the people. So I'll continue to play it that way. And if they want to play it their way, then if I play it again the next time with them, then I'll know. And I'll tell them, well, I want to go last.
I think those are some really good examples. I put some examples up here that are maybe not as challenging necessarily.
Yes. That first one is perfect.
So, eating messy food while touching pieces.
Rules police.
A lot of people can get really upset if you're doing that. One thing I'm going to say throughout this entire presentation is it's basically house rules. And if you're not talking to the people you're playing with right before the game, you're going to have more problems. I play with people that they don't care. Eat as much food as you want because they don't care about the state of the game. And if that's your house rules, that's fine. Rules police, yeah. There are some people that, and I mean, kind of the example you said, it could have been you or the other person that were rules police.
And I have been called that in the past. Mm-hmm. But I give perfectly logical, reasonable answers for why.
Obviously, cheaters.
Yeah.
That's a challenge. If you're playing with kids, it's a different thing. You might have gone to, there was a play therapy one yesterday, she talked about kids and cheating and how to address that. It's a little different. If you're with an adult, it's kind of harder to be like, hey, I saw what you did there. Sore losers, I've met a lot of those. I have been the sore loser. Disinterested. If you're noticing someone's disinterested, say it's like a 2-player game, you can be like, hey, do you want to play something else? Making fun of others, especially in role-play games. Role-play games you can get a little more challenging and nuanced with some of the issues, like you were talking about, this person just whipped out something out of the blue. And I personally have been told that sometimes I play to hurt, not to win. Although I also have very logical reasons for the things that I do, even though to other people it might look like I'm just cutting you off to be an a-hole.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And like I said, everything is a balance. Any one of these, you could have an instance where it's not really a challenging thing because it's just how you play with your best friend.
Can I add one to that?
Sure, there's innumerable.
I've come across multiple times players who will think that they know the move you're supposed to make.
Oh, that's in here, yeah.
And
Puppeteering.
what is
You're
it?
talking about puppeteering where it's like,
No, what? No, don't do that, man. You should go over here and do this.
Sort of like that, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing too is players who, I guess, think that the game should be played fast instead of taking the time to think about your move. And that's annoying to me.
Can I speak
And
to that?
I'm a big time taker. Because I like the strategy games, and I realize that there's a lot of, some games, and some of the newer games, they are very complicated games. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of decision making to be made, a lot of analysis, a lot of variables to take into consideration, and you can't, some people cannot do that like that.
So it's interesting, there's an online Settlers of Catan called Colonist.io. I've been mildly addicted to it. And you, try to be brief about this. There's a lot of different game mechanics and how you can set it up and time for your turns. But I played a one-on-one on Settlers where the timing was like, it's supposed to be like 30 seconds or something ridiculous. And this person, this is like one of the few troll experiences online I've had. This person was constantly in the chat, come on, keep going, we're supposed to go fast. And I'm like, no. And thankfully I stood up for myself in the chat. I was like, I'm not playing this way. I'm gonna take my time because I want to, and if you don't like that, you can quit. Unfortunately, if you quit a game in here, it docks points for you. So they were just, I probably made this person so mad because they didn't quit. They didn't want to get their points docked. So it's different in person, obviously. You can have better conversations. But the other thing, too, about taking people's turns for them, assume competence. I think as a therapist, that's something I always try to do with everyone, is assume competence, unless someone says, hey, I need help. And they're like, oh, okay, how can I help you? And especially with kids, because I grew up playing board games, and I think as a kid I didn't really mind too much if the adults were like, hey, you should try this. But looking back, I'm like, how do you know this kid doesn't know what they're doing? Especially if they've grown up playing board games. And then, of course, I'm 10 years old, whipping things out and beating people, and they're like, how can you do that? So helpful behaviors. These are just some examples. There's probably way more good examples besides these. There's probably other ways to provide positive gaming experiences. Some of these suggestions may not work for you in your particular situation, but that's fine. You can try things on. If they don't work, abandon it, try something different. In general, these are some good tips for most situations. Know the game rules before you play. I only recently learned this in like the couple last months. I mean, I knew it, but I didn't like get it. And I realized, oh, I should really read the rules before I teach other people this game. And it really helps, especially if you do have rules debates. If I'm the expert and I'm like, well, I read it and I interpreted it this way, and these are my house rules, and I can shut down if someone's coming into your house and being like, well, that's not how we play. Be like, we're here in my house rules. Expect boundaries. No food, no phones allowed. Boundaries are a big thing. And boundaries are individual, like I said, house rules. And most people don't have good boundaries. But, and it can change. Like, we're talking about food. Some people don't mind food. And if you don't have that boundary, cool. And try to express other people's boundaries too. If they express something like, hey, I don't like it when you pull something out of nowhere for this LARP that I had no idea. Respect that and don't do it again. Be positive and helpful. You don't need to, someone puts their piece there and you're like, well, that was a dumb move, why'd you do that? We're here to have fun, right? Like we're kids. Know your players. It's another huge one that I'm going to talk about. If you're playing with people you know what their boundaries are and how they like to play games. If you know there's someone that does like to go over rules a lot, make time for that, because that's how they enjoy playing the board game. And of course, everything's a balance. If you're playing with someone that really likes to go over rules a lot and you don't, have a conversation. Be like, hey, I don't really like to go over rules a lot, but let's see if we can find a happy medium where we're doing a little bit of both. If you're, in terms of knowing your players, if you're playing with people that you don't know, it's a little harder, obviously, but there are still basic strategies, and you can have like a 2-3 minute conversation before you play the board game. Like, hey, how do you like to play board games? Communicate feelings. So I'm going to hand these out to you because I think these are just amazing. As a therapist, I find, and actually maybe you can take one and pass it down. As a therapist, I find that 99.9% of the people I meet don't understand feelings. They don't know what to do with them. They don't like to address them. And I mean, that's legit. I get it. Feelings are hard. But it's really important. And I think we might need one extra. That's why I put these out feelings wheels. There's one going around that has more feelings on it, one that has less. There's a ton of these on the internet if you're interested. I like the one with more on it. I like the aesthetic of it. That's what I use with clients. But being able to know how you're feeling in a particular game helps you to better express those boundaries. So if you are in a live action role play, and say someone is being a little misogynistic or skeezy or something, say for me as someone that presents female, I might not have the bravery to be able to say, hey, I don't like that, please don't do that. But if I can connect with how I'm feeling and be like, yeah, I'm really feeling taken advantage of in this moment, and if I can connect with that, be like, yeah, I should say something, hey, please don't do that. That's why feelings are very important. Anybody have any questions so far?
Real quick, are you going to go into any of the consent stuff that we do with RPGs a lot of times? And
I did not have that on here.
all right, can I add something real quick in here?
Definitely.
Thank you. One of the things that I think could be applicable to any kind of game, regardless if it's an RPG or even just tabletop stuff, or and it's going to be different if you are in a setting with this is a regular group you meet with, or at a shop where it's like a quasi-regular group, maybe there's some new people here and there, or if it's at a convention, is that with the RPGs, a newer thing that's come around, and it's fantastic that this has evolved, is like a list of, it's a consent form basically. It's like, you know what, anything involving animals, I don't want to have anything in there because I lost my dog recently or something like that, or something along those lines. You basically, these are trigger things for me. But the other thing that's cool with it too is then you can work the other way. Is like, you know what, I've been watching like all these like historical things that I really like some like intrigue in there. You can put that in there, kind of stuff. Where other people are like, hey, I just went through this crazy divorce. I don't want any of that kind of crap. Sort of things like that. However, what I'm getting at is that it doesn't have to be as formal as these are the required behaviors at this table, but hey, you know what, when we're doing, you could list out stuff ahead of time so everybody's on the same page. And although it may seem a little infantile, you could be like, look, if you have a rules question, let's go, we can pause it at that point, and if it's a minor discussion, we can do it right then, but if it's something deeper than that, we'll have to wait for a break or whatever so we don't slow down play too much. Or you can say, we're not, this is not a speed run, we have this much time for today. If we don't finish out, we can go ahead and take a picture of the board, we can go ahead and catch back up later or whatever, this kind of stuff, and then establish those things ahead of time. One of the things about this hobby in general is that it is very attractive to people that don't necessarily have the best social skills sometimes. And it's because there's a rule set that we all agree upon, and it's like an organized way to do a social interaction, and that's why a lot of people like games. However, same set of people sometimes don't have the best skill sets, and so by encouraging people to communicate with each other, to be able to go ahead and say, look, I'm feeling this way, this is a thing, you help them advocate for it, you are getting rid of a lot of this stuff just by putting it out there on Front Street ahead of time. And so if you are running a game or if you're involved in a game, I think the best thing you can do is help advocate for those other people that are there by explaining, by putting it out there, and just putting it out there, and also by modeling a little bit too, and just being this is the thing that bothers me. I don't really appreciate that you're pushing all of us here at the table to move as fast as we can. I want a little bit of time to think. Is that okay? All right, cool. And then just go forward with that. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Oh no, that's great. And I think to add to that too, I am also learning that there is nothing wrong with addressing things after the fact as well.
Sure.
Which I think for me has been a challenge sometimes. And an example that is more psychology and not exactly gameplay, but my fiance and I realized that we tended to automatic lie. And we wouldn't realize that we had told this little white lie until after the fact. And at some point we both were like, haha, to each other, I do this thing. I was like, I do that too. And then we made this pact. Okay, we would like to change this about ourselves. So what we're going to do is every time we notice that we did an automatic lie to the other one, we would say immediately after, oh, hey, I just lied about that thing. Can you not get mad at me or judge me because I didn't mean to do that? And we did it, and it's working weirdly. Because now we have that safe space, and you can slowly go back in time and catch it a little earlier and a little earlier until eventually you're halfway through the lie and you're like, oh, that's right. And eventually you're in front of it and you're like, oh, that's right. So while, ideally, we should be talking to people before every game and being like, here are the rules. If for some reason you miss something, address it as soon as you think of it. So helpful behaviors, know the game rules. Clear understanding of the rules helps to get rid of disagreements. Know your players. Express boundaries. Set up rules for gameplay, the space that you're playing in, and your personal boundaries. Examples could be don't help other players or help other players. Either one, depending on your rules. This is an example as if, say, you're babysitting 5-year-olds and you're playing Candyland. That could be a house rule. If there's a parent sleeping, we need to play quietly. And another thing, your personal boundaries. So here's an example of if I was playing with someone and I needed to speak my personal truth and say, hey, when you debate rules, I feel anxious. Can we find a different solution? And I'm going to talk about I statements. I might as well hand them out right now. I statements, some of y'all who are clinicians might know what they are. They're pretty helpful. Thank you. And the idea is that, the idea is that you...
Need one more.
There's more up here too. You're not pushing the blame on someone else, because if you're talking about you did this and you're a bad person, and that's going to make the other person defensive and shut down, and you're not going to have a conversation. But if you say, I feel sad when you blah, 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 the focus is on you and your feelings, because honestly, when it comes to that, you can't really change other people. You can only change yourself. And focusing it more on you and what your experience was of it can be a lot more helpful. And this is just examples that I pulled.
Another thing with that is that it's kind of like modeling, but it's taking the heat off of somebody else. So if you see that somebody else is getting pushed around by another player who's bullying or whatever, they might not be doing it to you. You go, hey, I don't appreciate it when somebody tells me what to do. So do me a favor and don't tell me how to play my move and we'll be cool or whatever, this kind of stuff. And then maybe look at the point that you should be doing it to that person also.
Yeah.
Or it also might give the opportunity for that other person to go, yeah, you know what, this person, stop it, what do you, stop it, I got it, we're cool.
I think too, one thing that I have to break the bad news to clients all the time, that you can set boundaries, but that doesn't mean that people are going to respect them. And unfortunately, there are people in the world that will never respect your boundaries. And of course, at this point, maybe you have to decide, do I really want to have a relationship with them or play board games with them? And I mean, that's just as you meet these people sort of thing. And it can be really hard. Say you did use that I statement, you said, I don't really like it when you tell me how to play. And the person is like, oh, sorry, and doesn't respect it. Keep doing it. Keep saying. every time they cross that boundary, restate it. And that can be extremely hard, but you gotta do it. If you want your boundaries respected, you gotta keep doing it. Until, like I said, you reach a point where you realize they're just not gonna do it, and then you're like, bye. Being positive, here's examples. Positivity can be, I can see why you're upset that I won the game. Sometimes I feel that way too, when I played a good game but didn't win. Why don't we play again and you can be the starting player? Or negative, you're being rude and a sore loser. I won because I played a good game. You should just try harder next time. Does anybody have an example of what a negative way to express a boundary could be? Any other examples? Because we talked about positive ways to express boundaries, I statements. What would be a terrible way to tell someone your boundary?
So I can get extremely competitive in board games, and I will frequently just be like, well, just stop playing like an asshole. Not super helpful.
I had on here, pardon the language, I had, shut up, we're playing a game, not discussing politics. A positive way of saying that might be, hey guys, I really like it when we focus on the game and limit outside topics. Is it alright to talk about that topic afterwards? Know your players. Huge, big, giant theme on this whole thing is the more you can know your players and know yourself, the better. If you're teaching new players, say, at a convention, and a seasoned game player wants to play, make sure that they know there are new players and ask if that's all right, being patient while the new players learn. It's actually something my mother right there told me to put in there, and I was like, that's a really good idea. Obviously, if you're at a game convention, people might expect that they're going to be new players, but it can still be a good idea to just say, hey, this person's never played. We're going to teach them how to play. Another thing, you can play team games for new players. That can be really helpful. Someone that already knows how to play the game compared to someone that doesn't. Also, individuals with intellectual differences, children, older individuals, or anyone that just wants an easier time with learning or playing the game. And it can speed things up too, instead of leaving someone on their own and be like, I don't know what I'm doing. Communicate feelings. We talked about I statements. We handed out a feelings wheel and body scans. Does anybody know what a body scan is? I see some head nods. For anybody that doesn't know, a body scan is a therapeutic tool, typically in like mindfulness vein, where you can start like at your toes or at your head, and you basically just focus your attention in there, and you see, all right, how does my head feel? How does my face feel? What's going on with my neck? And you do your entire body. It might seem silly, but it can be extremely powerful. So if you're playing a board game and you notice that you're getting really like, something's going on, I'm feeling something, this person just cut me off, I don't know what to do, take a second while it's other people's turn and just check in with your body. And likely, you might check in with your body and maybe you'll see, oh, I feel really hot and my chest is like fluttery. Oh, that's a feeling of anger. I'm feeling anger. And then maybe you look at your feelings again and you're like, oh, there it is. And then hopefully you'd be able to express to the person, oh yeah, that really pissed me off. Even if it's in like a joking way. It can still be helpful to get those feelings out. So some other examples of what if. What if you're not full in teaching the game and you don't understand the rules? What if your boundaries are not respected? We talked about that already. I've already done these slides without realizing it. What if your players are not here to have fun? What if you just have players that are, I don't know, maybe they had a bad day and they're just not being the best player?
Like a bunch of kids that are there just to troll.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, we were talking with, there was a guy that was in the session yesterday, and he had issues like that where he basically was running an RPG, and it wasn't a therapeutic setting, but it was like an after-school kind of thing, and these kids were kind of like being tossed into this session as like an alternate for babysitting kind of thing, and they were just creating havoc as much as they could, and basically just derailing this guy's storylines and everything like that. And like immediately, like, oh, like their thing was they were minor thing, they had to like do guard duty for this prize cow for this town or whatever, and like one of the players immediately killed it. And so the guy was just like, I think you need to refocus the people and then kind of be like, all right, well, what do you guys really want out of this in this kind of situation? If they're not there to have fun, what do you want?
Exactly.
I mean, what can we do to make it that you're going to get something out of this? I mean, do you want a super challenging thing? Do you want a total party kill? Do you want just a goofy adventure? We can do that, but we have to change things around if that's what you want, but you need to communicate with them.
I think that's a really good example, like you said, communicating feelings. You reminded me, I was playing with a group of guys, and the one girlfriend was involved, but she was playing the guy's cat, so it was clear that she was like not completely invested in the game. And everyone in the D&D game was playing neutral characters, and there's one guy that was just neutral, and he played it as he literally didn't care about anything because he was neutral.
Oh.
And it was interesting, and I was playing a very complicated character with multiple personalities. And within the first session, we killed the people that were supposed to give us our quest. and it was by accident, but we were just so chaotic. And the DM was like, what do I do now? Which I get, but at the same time I was like, you could do whatever you want. Pretend that there was some dude in a closet that got saved and he's the one that gives us our quest. Like, you can do literally anything.
Put a note in your pocket, whatever. There's a lot of ways around that.
And I also wish too that this DM had said, maybe not to me so much, but to these other characters that were like neutral, and chaotic neutral. All right, well, what do you want to do? If you're wanting to play this chaotic neutral character, how do we help you have fun while also having some kind of story? In terms of boundaries not being respected, I think the 3 strikes rule is pretty simple and pretty good, and you can keep track of it in your head. If you've told someone, blah, 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 here's my boundary, and they don't respect it, and then a couple minutes later, oh, blah, 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 here's my boundary, and it's not like you have to say, well, if you cross my boundary one more time, you're going to time out. No, you just keep track of it in your head, and the last time that they cross it, you'd be like, hey, I'm really not, this isn't really respectful, I'm not enjoying this, I'm going to leave now. Or whatever version of that is helpful for you. Also, pick your battles. If you have a good friend that you know just has this one behavior that they do, and you're like, all right, the other 99 behaviors are cool, but it's just this one behavior, maybe you can pick your battles and let them have that one behavior if you're prepared for it. Communication. So I stole these from a book on summer camp because I'm teaching summer camp for kids next summer. I still think it's very applicable to communicating with all types of people though. Acknowledging the challenge. So in the summer camp world, that might be, hey, I see that you're having a really hard time doing this rock climbing wall or whatever. But in board gaming, it could be, hey, it sounds like you're not really clear on the rules. And then, of course, they may deny or say yes to that. Like, oh, yeah, actually, I wasn't quite sure on this one rule. And sometimes just simply acknowledging the challenge that you see can resolve the situation because they'll say, yeah, I don't really understand this. Can you explain it? There you go. Validating feelings. I can't say feelings enough. Yeah, that's really hard, isn't it, when you don't understand the rules? Or, oh yeah, this last time I didn't understand this rule either, so I can get why that would be very hard for you. Provide a solution. Again, sometimes as soon as you acknowledge it, the solution pops, because they're like, oh yeah, could you just repeat that rule again? There you go. Or if someone doesn't say that, be like, hey, do you want me to repeat those rules again? And apologize if necessary. Even if you don't think it's necessary, sometimes simply saying thank you for your patience can be really helpful. That is something else my fiance has been trying to do. Instead of saying sorry all the time because I'm sure y'all have met people that every other word is, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Even when it's like, well, what are you sorry for? Nothing happened. But thank you for your patience can be way much better, especially we use it all the time because we're often late places. And it's very applicable because, yeah, you had to be patient to wait for us. Instead of saying sorry, it's like, thank you for your patience for waiting for us.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
I think the reason people might have a conflict over rules is because a lot of the rules in tabletop gaming are not written very well. So interpretations can run the gamut.
For sure.
And that's a personal experience, not just for myself, but with other people that I've played with on a regular basis. And everybody kind of snickers, oh yeah, these rules aren't written very well, or they were translated from German or whatever. But that's something that you kind of have to keep in the back of your mind, I think.
For sure, and I think that's why it's helpful, like I said, I realized recently, read the rules beforehand if you're teaching a game, and decide on what the house rules are, or if you're in a household with more than one person and you have a game that you like to play a lot, take some time outside of actually playing the game to be like, all right, there's this game and the rules suck, but we want to play it, and maybe it's this one specific rule, what do we want to do with it, and then change the rules so it fits. I doubt that if you write the game manufacturers, you're going to get necessarily an answer back. Like, oh yeah, it was meant this way. And also trying to just find a general consensus. Sometimes you're just going to have to make concessions. If 9 people feel it's this way and one person doesn't, it sucks. I'm sorry for that one person. But if the general consensus is this way, it's probably the easiest way to figure it out. Yeah.
In tandem with that, as I've been playing games ever since I was a kid, but in the 40 years that I've been playing, everything from Risk to Catan to Wingspan and Arc Nova, I've read a lot of rules, and I'm sure there are probably people who play. If you're in here and you play games, and you play games a lot, you've read a lot of rules. And if you take the time to really look at them and to see how they're laid out, what language are they using, the translation from German to the translation from one language to another must be done in such a way that the people who are going to be buying the game and reading the rules are going to be able to understand it because it's written from the perspective of their own language. That's number one. Number two, the layout of the rules is a problem. Editing simple rules, things that should not be there, can cause a problem because when you go to read the rules, you're not sure what they mean. And if you're not sure what they mean, you're not going to be able to play the game, which causes a problem. You may interpret something one way, and then when you go to play the game, someone else interprets it differently. You have to be open to that. That's why when I go through and I read these rules, it's extensive. I look at them and make sure I understand them and make sure I try to find any problems before I go to teach it. And then I try to let people know, okay, hey, look, the rules say this, but it's not correct. And I think a lot of times when I play with players, I'm wondering whether or not they've read the rules enough to see the problems. Because if they haven't, then the communication that we're going to have may not be what it should be in order for that particular area to get resolved.
So one of the things I need to point out is
We live in the future, man.
it's 2023, and you can go online to check a lot of forms that most of these game manufacturers have set up. And if you have an issue with something, there could be that there was a spelling mistake or a translation error or something that was interpreted incorrectly when the localization of a game happened. If it's coming from Germany and they get translated to the United States, there's different stuff where like it might have been like a literal translation, but something didn't work with an idiom or something like that. That sort of stuff happens often. Like with Wizards of the Coast, they had their Unearthed Arcana, which is continuations of rules and stuff that are basically homebrews that the company made up to play test to then get feedback for, and then they turn around and kick it out in more rule books, but partially because they want to sell more books. But also, that kind of stuff is how stuff goes back to the company and gets kicked back. And back in the olden days, TSR would actually get phone calls and letters from people. What happens with this? What happens when I do this or this? And they would do a ruling on it and say, it should be this. And then they have like a newsletter they kicked out. So I mean, there is some feedback between designers and players that you can get this stuff. Now, whether or not you can do that like while you're at the table, that's a little different. But it's something to look into, especially if it comes up more than once. So there's that, and also I forgot where I was going with this. I'm sorry, I'm just totally derailing myself. Anyway, yeah, sorry.
I've actually had that experience.
Which?
Kingdom Builder.
Okay.
Is anybody familiar with Kingdom Builder?
What was it?
Kingdom
Builder. Okay. It's by a designer named Donald Vaccarino, who I believe did Dominion. Okay. And I actually had a online thing through Board Game Geek with him and other people.
Sure.
And the bottom line when I came away with that, the designer wasn't even consistent with his rules.
Really?
Indicating that you could do something with a particular piece, and it was like, no. Do you know what the design of your game was? It's Kingdom Builder. It's not move your ship on land and use it as a settlement, which is what he was basically saying.
That's what Viking did.
Well, one of the responses that I got from one of the people who I was discussing this was, well, he's the designer, okay? The designer is not God. The designer has designed a game initially with certain things in mind, certain rules for people like us to be able to play, okay? When you first get the game, you play the game according to the rules. You try to understand the rules the best you can, and then you play it. What I found was that after a while, my wife and I would play Kingdom Builder. We kind of expanded that out from 4 boards to 6 boards. We combined things. We bought the expansion. So we had played this game a lot. So I felt I had a good reservoir of knowledge about this game. And I went back and I posed this question about a particular piece which is not a house or something, being a settlement. And the discussion went on and on and on. I got various comments from people, well, you don't play according to the rules. Didn't respond back to that because they were only playing with 4 boards or something. And then eventually the designer said, well, yeah, you can take your ship, you can move it on the land, and then later on, and treat it as a settlement, and then later on, you can move it back into the water and treat it as a ship.
So,
Rules
time.
didn't really address that, and in the context of the entire game and all the rules taken into consideration, it didn't make any sense. So I thought, okay.
They should throw out rules.
That's
In the interest of time, it might be a good idea to move on with more time.
I'm going to express my boundary that in the interest of time, I would like to continue.
That's good.
Helpful behaviors that are sometimes mistaken for challenging that could be positive and maybe encouraged depending on the situation. Staying quiet can be perfectly fine. I've played with people at conventions that they don't really say much and you're like, you good? And they're like, I'm just enjoying the game. Expressing personal boundaries. Sometimes be like, oh, why are you expressing a boundary? That's challenging. No, it's good. Leading a game when overwhelmed. Asking questions. Sometimes people can get annoyed with that, but it's always helpful to ask questions to make sure you know what you're doing. Playing a good game. I think that relates back to sometimes I've been told that I play kind of dirty to win, but yeah, you can see both sides of it. It's playing a good game. You're playing to win. slides, tell me an example of something that you personally consider to be a non-negotiable when it comes to etiquette. Gaming is preferred, but I'll take any examples. So what's something etiquette-wise that...
People are paying attention, you don't have to constantly get their attention to come back to
Okay, it's a non-negotiable. Yep. So that's like common sense. You're here to play, so play it, pay attention. Don't be on your phone your whole time. Can you think of etiquette to you that doesn't make any sense? Rules that people have said, we're going to play this way, and you're like, that doesn't make any sense. That was a little bit harder, I guess.
I don't know, actually, I guess this counts, but it's not as much with like adults or people who have developed more in terms of their conceptualization of like social interaction. But oftentimes with kids, not cheating in terms of like, sometimes certain kids will be like, oh, I can just play this way, and sometimes it does like clash with, at the very least, the consent between players.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, etiquette is socially constructed. We may think that sometimes it's common sense, but it really just is stuff that human beings came up with, like social lubricant. And that's why, house rules, talk to your players, you get to create it. Like the example that y'all were debating over, the game designer isn't God, and you're the one playing it in your house. You're the one that gets to decide how you play. Etiquette is simply the customary behavior deemed polite by a specific culture. Culture etiquette is socially constructed. It can change over time. People often take culture/etiquette very seriously, but you don't always have to. Good game playing isn't about etiquette per se, it's about respecting diverse cultures and ways of being. General American game etiquette that I'm aware of asks to play other people's games, treat games respectively, put it back the way you found it, don't eat messy food around it, don't be a rules Nazi, respect the venue that you are in, leave at the designated time. If you're at a library and they close at 9, leave at 8:45. Don't be loud or rude. So what can we do when someone is engaging in challenging behaviors? I have a short little crossword here. Take one and pass it down. So these are skills that you can do when someone is engaging in a challenging behavior. And these relate directly to the crossword. It's a little bit challenging, maybe. Hopefully I'll be able to figure out what they are. And if anybody needs pens, I think they're on the table. You can ask people to stop so you can express your boundaries. Number 2, you can use I statements. Number 3, you can change the stimulus response pattern. So if you realize that every time you put a piece down in a particular manner, someone flinches. It's a simple example, but just don't put your piece down that way, and then they won't flinch. So that's an example of a stimulus response pattern. Enlist others to help. I think that's what you mentioned in your first example, that you had the one individual that was having some challenging behaviors in the LARP with this other person, but then other people got involved and said, hey, that's not okay.
I was saying that that is a thing that you could do. In my particular situation right there, that person who experienced it just waited until there was a break and then called them on it.
Okay, yeah, so they had enough bravery to be able to confront them personally.
Yeah.
And if for some reason they didn't, they could have said to, hey, my friend Johnny over here, would you help me talk to this person about this thing that's bothering me? Suggest alternatives. That's a pretty simple one. If you can think of a different way to do a certain thing that's triggering someone, be like, hey, why don't we try it this way? Deep breaths. You can go on the internet and look up innumerable number of breathing techniques. You can learn any of them you want. If you're playing with someone that you know is a bit challenging, just remember to breathe. Ignore the behavior. This comes straight from working with little kids, especially if you're at a convention and you're playing with someone that you know you're only playing with them for like 45 minutes or less. Just ignore it if it's not that big of a deal. You'll probably never see them again in your life. And body scan, we already talked about that as well. Where did them? Oh. Okay, there's an mouse.
You should be able to use the arrow keys.
I can use the arrow keys. Wow, technology.
There you go.
So, stimming/movement. Stimming is a regulatory behavior in the neurodivergent community, but anybody can benefit from this. So if you're talking stereotypes and you think of an autistic person, you might stereotype them as slapping their hands. That's a stereotype. Not all neurodivergent people do that. The reason why some neurodivergent people flap their hands like this is because it's stimming. Stimming is short for stimulation. Quick neuroscience. When you move your body, you produce lactic acid. Lactic acid is what gives you cramps if you've run too far and you got cramps in your side. Lactic acid is also helpful in your brain for getting your neurons to fire. So for anyone that has a brain difference, if you have more lactic acid, it's probably going to help your neurons fire in the way that you want. Movement helps that to happen because it's creating that lactic acid. Yes?
Is that why fidgeting happens?
Yeah, same thing. Fidgeting is the same as stimming pretty much. It looks like it blew your mind. But this is anyone, not just neurodivergent people. Anybody can do this. Everyone can benefit from having a fidget. It can be stress relief. It can cut tension if you pull out your giant stuffed animal and hug it. And again, leaving the game. Don't play with a challenging player. If you're going to the Sunday night library and there's just this guy that is always a challenge, just don't play with him. All right, speaking of neurodivergent gamers, and I'll go a little bit, we'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions, but we might run a little close to that time because we've been talking a lot. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. I think you might have been the one that mentioned, you alluded to it, I think right at the beginning, about social skills. That is, it's a stereotype, but it's also kind of true. A lot of neurodivergent individuals struggle with social skills. And you're also correct that playing board games is very rule structured. Often neurodivergent people like the structure and the rules because it's not as challenging as, say, this etiquette that America made up in this social thing that really doesn't make any sense because we made it up. Technically, yeah, we made up the game rules too, but at least it makes a little more structured sense. So neurodivergent is a difference in neurological functioning as compared to what a culture considers typical or the norm. And I think this definition is very important to say that there is nothing wrong with being neurodivergent. And I'm saying this as well to help you all not be challenging game players. If you're playing with someone with a brain difference or a clear disability, just to not be a DICK when you're playing with individuals with disabilities. Neurodiversity is different than neurodivergent. Neurodiversity is the range and differences in individual brain function and behavioral traits. These are natural differences, natural things we see as human beings pop out of the ground and are alive. So neurodivergent gamer traits, we talked a little bit about this. We don't have enough time for a discussion necessarily, so I will just go over these social skills. We talked about that. Sometimes neurodivergent people can, especially autistic people, can be actually really, really, really good at social skills, and that is because they started out having no idea what to do, and then they realized, I want to learn how to do this. And the metaphor that some people use is if you imagine a dolphin that wants to fly a plane, you might be like, that dolphin's never going to learn how to fly a plane. But say that it does. It's going to be really good at flying that plane because it's going to work really, really hard because it wants to fly that plane. And if you ask that dolphin, how do you fly a plane? It's going to be able to take you all the way from the beginning to the end and be like, that's how you fly a plane because I just learned this. But if you ask an eagle, how do you fly? The eagle's gonna be like, well, I don't know. I just did it when I was an infant eagle. And you see the difference there? That's why sometimes autistic and neurodivergent people can be really good at social skills. Rigid thinking, this can sometimes come in when you're talking about debates on rules or debates on how to play a game or debates on house rules. I really, really want it to be this way, and I'm going to have a problem if it's not this way. Special interests. I really love cats, so there's a game out called Boop that is about cats, and it is the best game ever just because it's got cats, and you're booping them off the bed. Stimming, we talked about that as well. Oh, that's right, I put them this ways. Social skills, rigid thinking, can include dislike of sudden changes, insistence on sameness, special interest or strong enjoyment of specific subjects. And stimming can be vocal, visual, auditory, mental, tactile, physical, or olfactory. There's a lot of different ways that you can do regulatory stimming movement. I definitely can see instances where if someone is vocal stimming, that might be a challenging game behavior. And understanding this, knowing that, I'm playing with a neurodivergent gamer who needs to stim to be able to regulate themselves, however their vocalizations are challenging other players, you might be able to say something like, hey, I understand that you really like to go beep boop boop while we're playing this robot game. Maybe you can move your fingers like a robot instead, or something like that. Now everyone's going like a robot. Other common characteristics of neurodivergent individuals, strong sense of justice. This can definitely come in, say you're playing with like a 10-year-old that's neurodivergent and they lost the game. Maybe they have rigid thinking and they didn't fully understand the rules and they're like, well, I should have won. And they have a strong sense of justice. They're going to be like, I should have won. This is not fair. Understanding these traits can help you manage these behaviors a little bit better. Strong morals, affinity for rules, structure, routine, and sameness, special interests we talked about. Sometimes if you're playing with someone that has ADHD, they're going to have a shorter attention span. Maybe don't play a long game like Lunar Rails. Unless it's their special interest, maybe they'll have enough attention span. Neurodivergent people often have the ability to see the trees instead of the forest, or the forest instead of the trees, or every single leaf on every single tree of every single forest. So you have to know which type you're interacting with. I am every single leaf on every single tree of every single forest, which can be stressful sometimes. Neurodivergent people may be very intelligent in some areas. They may have challenges in other areas. A little bit of more neuroscience with that. In a neurodivergent brain, well, actually, scratch that. In a neurotypical brain, the neurons are connected kind of like this. They're connected distally, so across the brain in a typical pattern that we might see. But if you're with a neurodivergent individual, they're more like this. So these over here may atrophy. The neurons might be like, well, we're not really firing, so we're not really into math. Math sucks. We don't like it. But we really like cats, because all of our neurons are connected to this one cat brain cell, the orange cat brain cell. That's why this person they'll know absolutely everything about cats. They can tell you anything you want to know, but math, no. Which can be helpful to know if you're playing with neurodivergent gamers. Helpful behaviors if you're playing with neurodivergent gamers: kind curiosity, ask for consent often, like, where would you like to sit? Maybe someone would not like to sit by the door because there's a draft and it's going to bother them the whole time while they're playing. Communicate clearly and effectively, be honest with emotions, we talked about. Stay positive, we talked about. Don't be fake or patronizing. If you have an individual with Down syndrome that is at a convention and they're playing a game, number one, assume competence. Don't look at them and be like, oh, I see they have a disability. They probably can't play Settlers. How do you know? You don't know this person. Instead, stay positive. And instead of saying like, oh, do you need help with your cards? No, assume competence. If the person comes to you and says, hey, I don't really understand that rule, all right, explain it. Otherwise, don't be a DICK. Don't get jealous. That's kind of if you're playing with some neurodivergent people that are just really, really good at this game because it's their special interest. They love cats and they're really good at it. They won the lottery with that one special interest. And also don't make it a big deal. You don't gotta be like, oh, I can't believe that you're so good at this game, boop, and it's terrible, I'm never gonna play with you again. That's not a helpful behavior. Coping skills for when you are the challenging game player. Deep breaths. Apologize. Thank you for your patience. Find a compromise to the problem if you can. Be willing to compromise on some of the things, understanding that we're playing together, so you're not always going to get your way. Stimming we talked about, body scan we talked about. Politely leave the game. If you have to just walk off in a huff, that's totally okay. But if you are able to say, hey, I'm really stressed right now, I don't think I can play, can I take 10 minutes? Communication is great. Be honest about what you're feeling or thinking. Any more examples of ways that you've been able to regulate yourself or notice that you were having a hard time and you were able to get over it? It's all right if we don't have any examples. Oh.
I have a friend who, when he thinks he flicks his card, he flicks the edge of it, and I really like my games, and I don't like it. So like I dealt with it for that day, but now every time it's over, I know what we're gonna play, and I make sure all my cards are sleeved.
That's a really smart idea. And it totally cuts out the issue. And you didn't even really need to address it with him. You just were like, I have a boundary, and here's an easy example.
You could also give him some sort of fidget or something. I mean, like just like something like this or whatever. Just like, hey man, don't mess up my cards. Okay, I try to hang on to this thing for a bit. It's like an unobtainium thing. I can't get any more of it or whatever.
All right. So what about blatant discrimination? So we talked a little bit about this, like with the consent stuff. And I guess I said I didn't have it in here, but I do have a little bit of it. What about misogyny? If someone's not being very nice to the female sex. Quick story, I was playing very recently, I think at the Frederickson Library in Harrisburg, and this guy, and he wasn't there for more than 10 minutes, and he came in, sat down at the table, and I identify as non-binary, so I identify as neither gender, they, them pronouns, but I can dress very feminine sometimes. So he came up to me, and he said something effective, hey little lady, which no matter what I identified as, I'd be like, is that really appropriate? And my response every time someone says that is, how do you know I'm a lady? Which is true. Whether it was true or not, it's still funny. And this is the first time I got this. His response was, well, I sure would like to find out. And honestly, yeah, it was terrible and gross, but I also thought it was kind of funny. Like, if the roles had been reversed, I guess I might have been like really proud of that comeback because it was quick and smart. So I knew I just wanted to end it, and I was like, oh, good job, good comeback, and I left. Because what else are you going to do?
If I may, real quick,
Yeah.
to derail that, you could have been like, if he's like, hey little lady, be like, what's up little boy? Or you could go ahead and say, oh, thank you, but I know I look young, but I'm actually over 21. And just put them on the floor. And then,
That's a good one, too.
and then just call them on that floor, or if you want to go the other way with it, only my doctor knows for sure, or whatever. I mean, just somebody that's being like that.
Yeah.
Step up.
Another misogynistic sort of thing with the example that I said, I was playing with these boys, and the girl was the pet, the guy's cat. They were kind of misogynistic too, not blatantly, but they were just, the whole time they were looking at me like, what are you doing here? You're a girl and you're playing D&D, we're so confused. Ableism, we talked about that a little bit. Don't be like, hey, can I help you because you have a disability? Ageism also is another one. When I was a kid, people didn't think I could play board games because I was like 8, 9, 10. Of course, being a neurodivergent person, I was really good at board games. So then I'd whip it out of my butt and win, and they'd be like, what? How'd this 10-year-old beat me? Which is satisfying. Also, racism. Some of these are kind of obvious. Don't be a racist. Don't be homophobic. My fiance is trans, and sometimes they'll be on video games online and get a lot of flack online, depending on how they're presenting that day. Any other examples of isms that y'all wanted to bring up?
Kind of one, it kind of falls under racism, and this was one that actually I had to call myself out on to some degree, because there was a particular player we had who was biracial, and some players in the group assumed, oh, you're the person made a comment about black people, and then everyone else in the group was like, well, you're black, and the client was like, no, I'm not. I'm biracial. I don't know that the person had words for biracial in that term, but was like, I'm not black, and I hadn't said anything explicitly, but I was like kind of like, oh, I assumed that person identified black, but they're, again, don't have the words for it, but
If this is the person I'm thinking of, the word they used was I'm mixed.
Okay.
Mixed.
Okay,
Okay.
so they didn't have, I forgot if they had
like-
specific terminology that they used, so
Yeah,
thank you.
they said
Thank
I'm
you for
mixed.
hearing me on that.
Very, very specific, like, no, I'm not black, I'm mixed.
And I think what happened right there is a good example of skills that we can use as groups and friends. Be like, hey, by the way, actually, I think they used this term. And then what you did was you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I'll use that from now on, and you moved on. And I think the moving on is really important, not making a big deal out of it, because often anyone of a marginalized community, they just want to be treated like a human being. They don't want you to be like, oh, I'm so sorry, I messed up your pronouns, can you please forgive me? And you make it all about yourself. That's not helpful. What about players under the influence? I have personally experienced this. I have a lot of friends that like to get high and play board games. If you have a group of people that all agree, let's get high and play board games, great. But if you have other people that you're inviting over that kind of really want to play the game not under the influence, maybe be respectful and be sober while you're playing the game. I had on there, how high is too high? I have played games with people that they're going to play it, and then they get really high, and then they're like, what am I doing? And then you can't really play the game anymore.
How do you cope with
Hopefully you've what?
I know, because how do you cope with the friend who every time you're hanging out wants to make everything a drinking game?
I think I might see if you can address it with them personally. Maybe you enlist some help from other people. They also may need to see a therapist. I don't know this person. But expressing your personal boundaries, obviously, is important. And like I said, 3 strikes rule, and then, not that I'm telling you don't ever play with this person, but express your boundaries, see what happens.
You could either do that, or you can lie. One of the things that's great is you can tell them, either you yourself are recovering, or look, I got a lot of people in my family that's a big thing for me. Can you not drink constantly, or can we just not? Or it makes me feel sick all the time. Or I just look. I'm half exhausted from work. If I drink anything, I'm going to be on the floor. I would rather play. How about it?
I think those are some good, that kind of feeds into expressing boundaries, because sometimes it can be hard to be honest with particular boundaries. And sometimes bending the truth a little bit can kind of butter up the toast in a way to make it a little bit better.
And also, I'm pregnant, she'll make me mocktails when I play.
Wow. Yes?
I would wonder why the person feels such a particular need for this. Is this that they get bored and this is how they keep themselves entertained? Because if that's the case, okay, well, maybe we need to amp up the excitement of this to help this person feel better, enjoying, and engaged. Maybe they are struggling with, oh, I'm around new people, I don't know how to do this, drink.
Yeah, exactly. So role-playing games, we're going to go through this a little quick because we are at 10:15 already. Role-play games are different than tabletop games. Obviously, there's a lot more diversity in social interaction. You have easier access to experiences that may bring up challenging emotions. You have different turn-taking elements. It can be a much larger group, which can be harder to handle, harder to spot challenging experiences. There can be less structure in gameplay, especially if you're doing a LARP at a forest where it's just a bunch of people. Boundaries can be wider in some instances. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm sure y'all can think of examples of role-playing games with challenging behaviors. Sometimes people might create an overpowered character. I have tried to do that. Often I've been told, no, you can't have 20 in this skill. Metagaming, if anyone doesn't know what metagaming is, it's the stuff that you know as a player is different from the stuff that your character knows. And if you're utilizing the stuff that you know as a player to gain advantages as the character, that's metagaming. It's not really helpful. If you agree on metagaming beforehand, fine. Complaints about the outcomes of the dice or DM rulings. Yesterday, someone was saying that someone was rolling the dice, like hiding it, and then saying, I got a D20. Well, then he basically just started saying, hey, everyone, let's roll out here. Let's see what we rolled. And it solved the issue.
Dice tower in the middle of the table was great for that.
Out of character arguments in character. This is kind of getting a little more into the clinical psychological side. Like maybe you're playing with your fiance and you are really upset because they're not doing the dishes. But then Eliana the elf is telling Krogarth the orc, hey, I really hate it when you don't wash my sword the right way. And it's clearly something else. Prejudice, misogyny, expressing opinions of other characters. Everything is a balance. What if I'm a therapist leading a game? I'll skip over this a little bit because we are at a therapeutic tabletop LARP convention. So hopefully you can gain some of these skills at some of the other presentations. But focus on goals primarily. If you've decided that your goal is social skills, well then come back to that. Our goal is social skills right now. Know your clients. Hopefully if you're a therapist or clinician, you know the kid that you're working with. And you've built a good rapport with them. Set good boundaries. Again, boundaries, feelings. Both are very important. And draw on your experience and your knowledge of clinical practice. I believe we are at the end. Any questions? Any questions before we go to the last activity? Nope. All right. Oh, thank you. It's on Canva. So we still have a couple of minutes. It sounds like no one has any burning questions. So 6 types of gamers and how you would respond. We have Phyllis Schwager, Noah Schumacher, Dahlia Monroe, Mariana Napolitani, Alexander Aronowitz, and Murad Nassar. Phyllis Schwager is constantly meowing and makes other animal noises during gameplay. The game is not animal themed. How would we respond?
I would not actually think this is a big deal for like gameplay wise. There's usually like even in like the most basic setting of a world, there's usually animals somewhere in this world. Like if you're saying moo sounds and we're in the middle of the city, I'll be like, wow, they really got those mini cows just right, you know?
Okay. That's a good one. Sometimes making jokes like that, making it positive, can either 1, shut down the person that's doing it, or 2, even better, get everyone involved so it's even more fun and it's not even a challenging behavior anymore.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you said that, yeah?
Expanding on that, sometimes it's, okay, I wasn't planning to put cows in this, but you know what? Let's make this an aspect of the story, the game, the setting.
Exactly.
So that this person who has some connection to this can feel good about it.
Exactly. Mr. Noah here is a sore loser and keeps saying, it's pointless anyway. I shouldn't even continue. You might as well quit. Win the game and get it over with.
This
this isn't a direct response, but potentially, assuming this is in a therapeutic setting, potentially if there's an individual counselor, potentially talking with an individual counselor about like, yeah, there's a lot of like, so, I'm forgetting the term for cognitive distortions related to like, okay, specifically I'm going to fail, like that kind of, like maybe saying like, let's address this at a deeper level because it seems like a very deep.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
defeating
definitely.
attitude?
Yes.
What was that?
Self-defeating attitude.
Self-defeating attitude, yeah, for sure. And there definitely are some things like this. I focus a little more on the non-clinical side, just for helpful for your everyday average person. But there are definitely some clinical ways. If you're a therapist, you have a lot more freedom and license to address things with people because it's your job. Dahlia jokes about cheating, tries to cheat and denies it. I have to admit, I was this way a little bit as a kid because I really wanted to win. Complains that I should be able to do that, and also argues about the rules to make it in their favor. How would you address this?
Group dynamics usually works best for the group of kids that we work with. It's basically game and try to understand like, hey, you can cheat and win in the first 5 minutes of the game, but now we have 55 minutes left of time and you're doing nothing and everyone's angry with you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, your friends aren't going to be happy if they can't play the game because you want to cheat early on.
Our colleague had we were playing werewolf for a while and a lot of kids were peeking. So then we started playing mafia and we're like, you can peek, but if you get caught, then you get killed.
Oh, that's great.
You need a witness.
That's great.
So, like, you have to be stealthy about it. And we just like made it like a more complex part of the game.
A really important thing, just real quick, that people need to learn is that by losing, you learn, and it is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily the end of everything. It's not the end of your existence if you lose or if you fail at something. And like on Kids and Bikes and a couple other game systems, they reward you for you lost that roll, but you get an adversity token, and so that you can spend it later. It's basically like a bonus that you can utilize, or you can help somebody else with it later.
Mm-hmm.
And so by allowing that into a system, if it's not there already, especially if you have like younger kids that want to cheat constantly because like I'm losing, I'm just gonna lose the game. Well, yeah, you lost that, but you now are getting this that you can use later, or you can help out another player, and we can all win together, and that kind of stuff. So
I think for me too, and it depends on the kid. When I was a kid, I remember wanting to cheat because I was mad that I wasn't winning and getting that social advantage maybe. But once I started doing it, I started winning, I realized after a while, this isn't that fun because I'm not really winning. I'm not really more intelligent than the other person. So for some kids, it might resolve on its own. Mariana tells newer players how to play the game the right way, gets upset when they don't take her advice, makes comments about being really good at the game, and everyone should listen to her. Any ideas on how to address this?
This is more from like my personal experience being a DM now. Our friend, I love him to death, but he is someone who's played D&D a lot more than me. So like he knows all the actual rules for like the gameplay or like rolling and all that jazz. And sometimes it'll get to a point where you're like, I know you know like the right way to play it, but we're playing this game in a new way. We're trying to play it so that everyone can have fun. And I personally, I'm just letting you know that I don't want to be very specific when I think something's really fun and cool for the story we're telling. Because it's all about the story, guys.
Yeah.
Fun story.
I think another thing, I'll get to you in 1 second. Another thing I've learned working with kids, especially like in schools and in classrooms and groups, if you have that kid that's popping off because they're having an issue or they're bored or maybe they're similar to this, you can actually give them that leadership role, but you get to decide what that, did I take what you were going to say? You get to decide what that leadership role looks like. So then they're distracted doing this other thing because they're like, oh, I got this leadership role, as opposed to saying, oh, well, you didn't do it the way you should or whatever. Yeah?
So to kind of expand on what you mentioned about the communicating, this is how we are focusing, setting those expectations about, hey, we are focusing on the story, blah, 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 blah. Hey, I'm still a beginner. There are certain rules that I am that are not as important to me. Also, what aspects of this experience and rules are important to you?
Yeah,
so you can find that
exactly.
balance.
All right, Murad, I believe is our last one. Murad is older and he has difficulty with understanding rules in gameplay. He's eager to do well, but he often misses important aspects of the rules, and he looks hurt when anyone points it out. Any idea how to address this? Yep.
Have a conversation with him, but outside of the context of the group. Don't, in mid-group. Hey, Murad, I hear you are having a difficulty with this in front of the whole group. Now, it may be that after a one-on-one conversation, you can say, hey, is it okay if myself as well as the group supports you in this? We want you to be involved and have a good time. What helps you and what makes you feel the most comfortable?
Yeah. I had an experience recently where I went to someone's house that I had never met before with some people that I had met. So it was a group situation, and there was an older lady. I don't know how old she was, but she had to have been like 70 or 80. So definitely older. And I was unaware of some social events that had happened before I got there. And some rules disagreements, I think. I'm still not completely sure what had happened. But I was playing the game, and I noticed that this lady was getting the rules wrong from my understanding. And I went to speak out, but the other person that was playing with us was like, shh, no. And they were doing that because this had already been addressed, and I wasn't aware of that. So I had to do some quick reframing and thinking and be like, oh, all right, so it looks like I'm not going to get what I want out of this social situation. And I decided, all right, we're just going to play the way that this individual believes we're playing because that's how it is. Which, if you're in a situation like that where, hey, maybe I'm never going to meet this woman ever again, all right, it's fine. I'll just play the way that she understands it. And I still had fun. I just had to play the rules a little differently. Oh, we do have one more. Alexander is very protective over his copy of the game. He yells at players if they bend cards. I'm not saying that's challenging behavior, but he has food near the game. He talks while playing. Yells at players if they bend cards, has food near the game, talks while playing, or doesn't treat the game seriously. This would be an example of someone who is having boundaries, but maybe they're a little too crazy about their boundaries. So how would you address this?
This reminds me of like when kids like bring their stuff to school but don't want anyone else to watch it. Where it's like, okay, so keep it at home, and like that's sort of almost how I feel about this. Like, well, let's go to a board game cafe and play that, and then you can keep your stuff.
Yeah, great idea.
Like untouched and perfect and collector's edition as you want it.
Perfect. Number one rule: have fun. Obviously. Everyone wins when we play nice. Just my information up there. And, I didn't cite my sources. I put my note up there to cite my sources. Well, anyway, thank you everyone for coming. If you have any other questions, I know we're at 10:30 pretty much, so we're out of time. But any other questions, talk to me afterwards.